This is the second in my series on Star Trek, and that's, of course, Star Trek 6. And I've titled this Shakespeare in the Original Klingon. And this is an interesting one because it's written and directed mainly by the same guy who did Star Trek 2, which we talked about last time, The Wrath of Khan. And as we get started, I would just like to encourage all of us to approach everything in life with the same pleasure that Captain Sulu takes in this cup of tea. It's a beautiful scene at the beginning of the film where he really just takes a moment for himself, and I appreciate that. Now, it's also funny that the table the cup of tea was sitting on was hiding the device that shook the stage later, but it was a very clever little bit of stagecraft, and I enjoyed that. So let's just all enjoy this the way Sulu enjoys his tea. Star Trek 6 was directed by Nicholas Meyer, who, as I mentioned, directed The Wrath of Khan, which is the other Shakespearean movie in the Star Trek film series featuring the original cast. And this has a lot of the same qualities as The Wrath of Khan. Like, you've got a charismatic villain, world-changing consequences, and of course, lots and lots of references to William Shakespeare. But this movie also is really valuable as like a distilled history lesson about how the Cold War ended. And if you think about it, this in itself is very, very Shakespearean. History plays like Julius Caesar and Richard III compress years down into what seems to be days or weeks. And that kind of also happens in this movie. And the sort of events that Star Trek 6 covered are exactly the kind of subject material that Shakespeare covered when he was writing his history plays. Now, this movie was made and released in real time as the Soviet Union was falling apart. And it's a really excellent time capsule of the politics and the emotions at that time. I saw this movie when it first came out, and I didn't really understand everything, but I was fascinated. And it did make me want to learn more about Shakespeare. And not just that, but international relations. And so at that age, I was at least able to understand that, Starfleet represented kind of the NATO alliance and the West, and that the Klingons represented the Eastern Bloc, but that was about all I could really get. So I thought we would start by looking at the timeline. And I'll just bow out quickly so I don't block this. So in 1988 was when the Soviet Union kind of started destabilizing a little bit. And then in 1989, you had Star Trek V come out, which was not popular. That was the weird one, as I think a lot of Trek fans call it. And almost immediately, they started production on Star Trek VI, and they wanted something that was more timely. And then you had just a few months later, the Berlin Wall falls in November 1989, and that's a real sign that things are opening up and changing. By 1990, obviously I'm giving a very distilled, very compressed version of all this. But so by 1990, the Soviet republics were genuinely moving toward independence. And by 1991, Moscow is genuinely losing control of the USSR. Here's where things get really interesting. In the beginning of December 1991, this film, Star Trek VI, comes out. And just a couple weeks later, the USSR is dissolved. And that is capturing in real time what was going on with the end of the Cold War. And the events and the personalities are cataclysmic in the way that Shakespeare would have really, really recognized. There's one thing, though, that is kind of the historical harbinger of all of this, and that is the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. So the same thing happens in Star Trek 6 because it begins with a similar incident. So I have this picture, this boom. That's a highly technical term because the Klingon energy production facility at Praxis has exploded. And the shockwave hits Captain Sulu's ship, and I am sorry to say that beautiful cup of tea got destroyed. So RIP tea. And while I'm American, I do, of course, live in England, and my residency permit requires me to observe a moment of silence for the fallen tea. Thank you for your service, T. You have died for king and country. Well done. Okay, now that that business is taken care of, we can move along. Captain Sulu sees that most of Praxis is just gone. So he calls the Klingons to ask if everything's okay. Things are not okay. Not even a little bit okay. They're very much not okay. So then someone from Klingon High Command cuts in, and this is where it's really interesting. He says everything's hunky-dory. And this is kind of how the Soviets tried to handle the Chernobyl disaster. You had the reactor number 4, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, which in 1986 was part of the Soviet Union. It exploded, and that is both the worst nuclear disaster in history and the most expensive disaster in history. And for 2 days, the Soviets just didn't tell the outside world that anything had happened. But just as Mr. Sulu had detected the explosion on Praxis, you also had a power plant in Sweden that discovered the spreading radiation, and eventually the Russians had to come clean. And they gave this statement. There has been an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. One of the nuclear reactors was damaged. The effects of the accident are being remedied. Assistance has been provided for any affected people. An investigative commission has been set up. And that doesn't sound terribly genuine, I don't think. It's very bureaucratic, it's very brief, it's not terribly informative. And the interesting thing is that the guy from Klingon High Command says something pretty similar. There has been an incident on Praxis. However, everything is under control. We have no need for assistance. Obey treaty stipulations and remain outside the neutral zone. So yeah, this is, remarkably similar in its attitude. Sulu didn't believe it, just like the West didn't believe it when the Soviets were not totally forthcoming about what was going on at Chernobyl. And this event was kind of seen as like the harbinger of the Soviet Union's demise in retrospect. And then so they used this in this film. So this is where I'm bringing it back to Shakespeare, because this is the sort of thing that Shakespeare would have caught on to as a subject for a history play, where this is a hinge of history, where huge events are turning on single personalities and single events. And so compressing these things for the purpose of the play or the film is exactly the sort of thing that Shakespeare would have done in his history plays. And all of this happened under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the last leader of the Soviet Union, and he is the direct inspiration for the character of Chancellor Gorkon, the leader of the Klingons. Oh, we've got to go through here, sorry. So you can see right here, this connection is not meant to be subtle. Their names start with the same 3 letters, G-O-R. Both fought against a very entrenched establishment to get their nations to engage in peaceful dialogue with their foes and open up to reforms. I mean, put your hand in the air if back in junior high you had a social studies test where 2 of the vocabulary words were glasnost and perestroika. So glasnost meaning to be more open with information, and perestroika meaning a restructuring of the economy and the political establishment. And so, both these guys, they've got similar names, they've got similar historical functions, and they both have interesting foreheads. So yeah, not a subtle connection, and it's one that we are definitely meant to make. It's not meant to mean anything else. So this lays out kind of the political and historical context, which we really needed to understand the literary references properly. And I think if you teach kids anything to do with history or social science, and you're doing anything toward the end of the Cold War, I think this film would be a great place to start, because it captures the zeitgeist of the moment as well as pretty much gives an overview of the history of the period. I wanted to pause just a moment to check in with all of you on comments. Let's say hello to everyone. So let's see. We've got VBLMTUR. Hi there. Georgia Bell. Hello. Hello, Georgia Bell. Bazemore. How's it going, dude? Raising Cats. I was a kid that watched Star Trek TOS in the 60s. You are lucky. I only got to watch it on reruns, so that must have been really fun to watch it back then. And Ray and Cats, parallels. Yes, absolutely. This film is intended to parallel the politics of the late 80s going into the 90s. And yeah, anyway. And then we've got Grey Knight and Cecil Ree. Hit the like button. Thanks very much. Please do. You know, it feels weird saying it. I try not to say it in my videos. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. It feels very, I don't know, odd and insincere to me. But anyway. Okay, well, welcome all. I'm so glad you're here. And so now what we're going to do is move on to the more properly Shakespearean stuff in this. Although I ran into a problem. There is so much Shakespeare in this film that I realized that if I tried to do it all in one night, we would be here forever. So what I've just done for this evening is I'm only going to talk about the dinner scene toward the beginning of the film, and then I'm going to save all the other Shakespeare stuff for another live stream because it's just literally too much. It's absolutely packed with Shakespeare from top to bottom. So what we have here, I think it's fair to say that Shakespeare would have understood the script, characters, structure, and message of Star Trek VI. The dinner scene is the most overtly Shakespearean part of the movie. It reminds me actually a lot of the end of the play Henry V, in which the victorious English King Henry is coming to negotiate the peace settlement with the defeated French king. You will see that in this dinner scene, the Klingons end up more in the power position and the Starfleet officers end up on the back foot. An interesting twist of fate is that back in the 50s, Christopher Plummer was in the lead role of a production of Henry V, and William Shatner was his understudy. So it's funny that that gave preparation for 35 years later when these same two actors come together in a scene that's very reminiscent of Henry V, and they face off in the roles of Kirk and Chang. When the Klingons arrive, they are revealed in absolutely theatrical fashion. You get this, first you see them materialize, and so they're just fading into the scene. And then we get this wonderful reveal of Chancellor Gorkon. And this is absolutely eye candy for theater kids. It starts with his amazing boots, and he's carrying this like giant bone thing. It's really cool. It pans up and you see the beautiful quilting on his doublet, and just even like his leggings and everything. It's so highly detailed. And then we see his gorgeous belt and the top of that giant bone that he's holding, his beautiful gauntlets with the gold trim, this excellent collar, and I love the epaulets on his doublet and the silver chain. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we finally see the man himself. And this is David Warner, who is a very experienced Shakespearean actor. This production is packed full of people who have done Shakespeare before, which is why they're able to pull it off, because really at the end of the day, Star Trek is a very bonkers concept, and it takes people who can completely commit to these roles to pull them off. The Klingons are dressed in the style of Elizabethan England. That's the time that Shakespeare lived in, except it's just been adapted for a sci-fi setting. However, I really feel that Shakespeare would have understood what we're looking at here. And more especially to the point, he would have understood the way all of this clothing that the Klingons are wearing completely indicates their social status and who's in charge of what. I will step out of the way here just a moment so you can see this better. If you see here, we've got Gorkon on the left, and then on the right, this is a portrait of Prince Edward, who was the son and heir of King Henry VIII, who would also be the father of Mary I, also known as Bloody Mary, and eventually Queen Elizabeth, who was, sometimes employed Shakespeare. They both wear a rich red doublet with broad shoulders, and they've got this ornate chain that's all, Edward's has got gems in it, but you can see how Gorkon's is very, very heavily textured. Edward's doublet's embroidered with gold thread, and Gorkon's has silver chain. They've got a stiff, tall collar for a formal look, and while Edward has a dashing hat trimmed with golden gems, Gorkon's got golden gems twined directly into his hair. You can see them from behind when he sits down. There are slight differences, but the overall look is very similar. We also see a similarly Elizabethan look in Gorkon's daughter. She's the second ranking person in the room. And so this is on the right, you see a portrait of a Tudor woman. Her identity is not known. I'm not going to get into the arguments over who she is. We just need to know she's definitely royal or very high noble from the way that she's dressed. So she's got a rich dark gown, and they're both covered in embellishments. And you can see that split collar in the front. I really do think that this look for this Klingon noblewoman is very directly taken from these fashionable Elizabethan collars. And then you can see how they've both got, embroidery and embellishments. Because it's the Klingons, you want it to be a little more tough looking. So it's actual metal as opposed to shiny metallic thread. But then I think the most beautiful thing about this costume is this lovely reference to a French hood. So on the right, you see the woman with the white and gold hat and then the veil hanging down in the back. And what they've done over here on the left with the Klingon lady is they've given the lines of a French hood. And this was something fashionable that noble and royal women would have worn. And then when you see her hair, her lovely shiny dark hair, it hangs back down exactly like a veil. And if you look at this other one, this is showing a French woman. So, you can see how French hoods came in different styles, and some of them had that little V point in the front. So yeah, anyway, nice take on a French hood in a sci-fi setting. Next up, we've got General Chang, and he looks very much like a military gentleman of the period. This painting on the right is of a nobleman who's also a soldier, but he's definitely not royal. You can see he's got the sash, but his sash has extra embroidery, General Chang's does, compared to the gentleman behind him who has a more simple sash. So it shows that he's got a much higher rank. He's got beautiful quilting on that black doublet, and you can see it resembles the striping on the Elizabethan style doublet that this gentleman's wearing here on the right. I put this one in so you can also see the inspiration for Gorkon's collar. And this is a gorget, which is a piece of medieval armor. And you can see how the lines of this directly inspires what Gorkon's wearing. So when these people step on stage, they really are meant to look like Elizabethan actors who are just ready to go to a Shakespeare play. They've just done something really, really clever where they've translated the look into this ultra-futuristic science fiction setting. And I'm crazy about it. And if you've got a kid who's a theater nerd or a costume nerd or a history nerd, great. This is exactly the kind of thing that they could get really, really into. We've also got in our little slideshow here, we have one of the lesser ranking gentlemen in General Chang's party. And I've compared this to, this is a painting that hangs in the Tate Gallery in London. This is a guy who is a gentleman. He's not noble, he's not royal, but he is well off. And you can see again the similarities in the lines, the broad shoulders, the quilting. The man on the right has what's called a slashed doublet, where they've cut openings into it so you can see bright color underneath, but those vertical lines are still the same. You don't get the dashing hats with the Klingons, but quite a lot of their facial hair would have fit in just fine in the late 1500s. Now, the funny thing is you compare that to the guys in Starfleet who have come to greet them for this dinner, right? And, the Klingons have made quite an entrance. They're well-dressed, they're elegant, they're courteous, and you compare this to the Starfleet officers whose uniforms actually make it quite difficult to tell them apart at all. Like, just at a glance here, you don't know who the boss is. They're all kind of standing in a line together. Their uniforms are all very similar. So you add in the fact that Kirk is in a bad mood and he's quite rude when he greets the Klingons. And Starfleet is not looking great right now. If Shakespeare watched this scene, he would have recognized and been impressed with the Klingons, and he probably actually would have found the human characters in this scene and the Vulcan part human. He probably would have found those guys a little more puzzling because he wouldn't have known about their rank or what their job was or who they're supposed to be, or more importantly, how he's supposed to respond to them. In fact, you even have these Rosencrantz and Guildenstern guys, that's what I call these characters, who they work in the transporter room, and then as soon as the Klingons leave, in order of rank, if you notice, Gorkon goes first, then his daughter, then General Chang, then the lesser ranking gentleman. That's intentional. So when they leave, then Rosencrantz and Guildenstern here complain that they all look alike. And as I've just spent the last few minutes explaining, they really, really don't look alike. It's very, very clear if you follow a Shakespearean era code of conduct exactly who these people are, and it's very easy to differentiate them. So, yeah, I'll make that case that I think Shakespeare would have been very impressed with the courteous speech, the classy appearance, and the proper etiquette of the Klingons. And so it's really no surprise that the Klingons in turn would be inspired by Shakespeare and go so far as to embrace him and even claim him as one of their own. At the start of dinner, Gorkon raises his glass and toasts to the undiscovered country. And then everybody stares at him like it's a class full of ninth graders and they have no idea what the teacher's talking about, and they just desperately want to get an A on their pop quiz about Hamlet. This reference, as Spock will point out, comes from Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1, which is part of the famous to be or not to be soliloquy. Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. So in this speech, there's one unfamiliar word. The word fardels means bundle or burden. So what this bit of the speech is saying is, why do people carry on with life even though it's difficult? Because we have dread. We don't know what's coming after this life. And so we know that things are difficult, but the undiscovered country, death, whatever comes after this life, that's very, very uncertain. And so most people are very happy to stick with life as it is rather than rush toward the unknown. And that's really interesting because in this original context, the undiscovered country is death. And then, so everyone sits here and stares at Gorkon in surprise, but he explains that what he means in this context is that this phrase means the future. Just wanted to check in back quickly with some of your comments. We had Ray and Katz, he could play a convincing king. Well, I think he does play a convincing king. I think, Chancellor Gorkon is effectively, if you think of it in Shakespearean terms, he serves the role of a king. He is the ultimate authority. He's very grand and noble, and everyone obeys him. So Ray, and then also kudos to the costume designers. Chang was the one you wished would shut up. So Ray, that comment, that's funny because later in the film, I won't get into it tonight, but later in the film, McCoy does get fed up with Chang because he won't stop quoting Shakespeare, and he eventually just goes, "Shut up," which is, it's a funny bit. I'll talk about that another day. No, Oliver Holmes. I saw this movie in theaters as a kid, loved it, and yes, today I am a devoted Shakespearean scholar. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I would be curious to know, let me know and we'll get back to the comment later. Did you see this one first, or was this the first Star Trek Shakespeare thing that you had seen? And, maybe like, how did it inspire you? Did you already know about the Shakespeare, or did it lead you to the Shakespeare? Because that's kind of the point of this series that I'm doing, is how can we drop little bits of Shakespeare in the way of the children that we teach or that we're raising so that they can get interested, because it can be very difficult to just completely consume a Shakespeare play all at once. It can be a lot for a kid, but if you can kind of introduce it in these little morsels, it can make it tempting and attractive and fun, and they just discover it a little more naturally, and I think that's a better way to do it. Let's see. So what do you think? Oh, that's a conversation for you guys. Great. And then the older Ray and Katz, the older I get, the less I dread the undiscovered country. I think that's a good attitude to have, because the truth is, it's inevitable. Ain't none of us getting out of here alive. That's the reality of life. And so, I think just at least acknowledging it, it's not good to dwell on it. You don't want to lose the time you have worrying about the time you're going to lose, if that makes sense. Oh, and then Lightspeed Tractor. Well, this got existential quickly. It sure did. And that's really it. This is a very, very existential film, and it touches on these themes, not always comfortable to think about, but very, very important. And then Bazemore, to a well-prepared mind, death is just the next great adventure. Oh, that's actually, yeah. There's a similar quote in Peter Pan where Peter Pan says to die will be an awfully big adventure. And I think these are all sentiments that the Klingons would agree with because they're basically space Vikings. I'm a huge fan of the Klingons and Klingon culture. This is a great conversation. Thanks, everybody. I really like that. Okay, well, let's get back to this. So Gorkon has just explained that to him, the undiscovered country means the future. The irony here is that death is in Gorkon's immediate future. He will be murdered immediately after this dinner in a plot led by the Starfleet officer Valeris, just as King Duncan was killed in a plot hatched by Lady Macbeth in the play Macbeth. So both the original meaning in Hamlet, the undiscovered country meaning death, and Gorkon's more optimistic meaning of death meaning the end of an angry past and the birth of a better future, both of those apply in this scene. Super deep, right? Of course, Spock is both courteous and intrigued, and so he points out the reference. And Gorkon quips that you have not experienced Shakespeare until you've read him in the original Klingon. And, I want to do just a fun little sidebar into here where, because of this reference, some people who are far nerdier than me put together a Klingon Shakespeare version of Hamlet, and they said that this is by William Shakespeare. This is a reference. The writer of the movie got the idea for this line from how the Nazis tried to appropriate Shakespeare as a writer that represented the true Aryan race. And yeah, so we've got here, this is the Klingon Hamlet, which I'm going to admit I am not nerdy enough to have read. So that's a level of nerdery that not even I can aspire to. But if any of you have read it, please tell me if you actually enjoyed it. I mean, you'd have to go to all that work first to learn Klingon. But I would be interested to know, I don't know, what do you think of the poetry in it? Does it flow? Is it fun? Or is this just sort of a gimmick, which it kind of is, and that's okay. But yeah. In the context of the scene, I think it's pretty clear that the characters in this scene know that Gorkon is just kind of telling a little bit of a trolling joke. I know that in the Star Trek canon, there is the idea that Klingons have tried to appropriate Shakespeare, but I get the impression that the people in this room know that Gorkon is kidding. And I would like to spark a furious nerd debate over that. So if you're a Star Trek geek, argue over whether or not these Klingons actually think that Shakespeare is a Klingon, or if they're just kind of trolling the Starfleet guys just a little bit. And you get that from General Chang too, who quotes "to be or not to be" in Klingon. He says "tach pach tach bech," which it's not an exact translation. It means more like to go on or not to go on, or to continue or not to continue. So it's more of a translation of meaning as opposed to literally to be or not to be. All of this is not impressing Kirk, who is pounding Romulan ale and not even trying to hide his stink face. And I love this picture of him because it's very representative of how a lot of kids feel when they are forced to study Shakespeare as opposed to coming to it voluntarily. Like, if you have to force a kid to read it and you're saying, but you don't know how great it is, this is the stink face that you're going to end up with, and it's not going to go very well. This scene shows that the Klingons are better at observing their adversaries and that they have come to this dinner better prepared than the Starfleet officers. At the beginning of the scene, the Klingons carefully observe and imitate human dining customs. They watch what everyone's doing with their napkins, and they just really look around and see what's going on in a way that the Starfleet officers aren't. Like you can see here in this picture, Chang is observing the behavior of those around him and trying to fit in smoothly. And Kirk is just giving him the stink eye. Like, he's really being rude. They've not only discovered Shakespeare because of this curiosity about those who are different from them, but they've embraced him. And so this proves that humanity's greatest writer can even speak to weirdo aliens wearing vinyl doublets. And then, none of the Starfleet officers have put in any of this kind of work. In this film, you don't see anybody from Starfleet being aware of, let alone accurately quoting, say, a Klingon author. You get the idiot Rosencrantz and Guildenstern characters say they smell, and Uhura complains about their table manners. The only one at this party who acquits himself well, other than Spock, is Scotty, who cheerfully predicts that this dinner is a glimpse at a more friendly future. And I wonder if perhaps as a Scotsman, Scotty is better able to hold his Romulan ale while everyone else is drunk as a skunk and getting kind of ornery. The evening leaves Spock mortified about his colleague's horrible behavior, and all he can do is stand there in dismay as they stumble off to deal with their hangovers. As a parent, I would just like to stop and say that this scene is a good lesson for kids about how booze can help you say and do stupid things and leave you feeling terrible afterwards. This scene helped a kid like me realize that Shakespeare can appeal to someone from any cultural background, and that Shakespeare can be recontextualized and reinterpreted as the occasion requires. General Chang certainly understood this, and he showed witty irony at the end of the dinner when he steps up to Kirk and says, "Parting is such sweet sorrow." And this line is spoken by Juliet to Romeo at the end of the famous balcony scene, and it's originally spoken between young lovers instead of old enemies. And sarcastically deploying it at this moment shows not only that Chang really does understand his Shakespeare, but he's got like a nice, witty, dark sense of humor. Of all the Star Trek scenes that reference Shakespeare, I feel that this one is the absolute peak. We've got two great kings in the form of Gorkon and Kirk holding their courts together, and they're negotiating the future, as happened at the end of Henry V. We've got multiple references to literature and history, and a battle of wits that is decisively won by the Klingons. And we have a scene that distills a crucial period of history into a single scene. And I feel safe that saying that the dinner party in Star Trek VI is a scene that would impress even the great Klingon bard, William Shakespeare. So thanks for joining me on that tonight. Let's go back and see some of your comments. So I knew a guy, Bazemore knew a guy in college who was fluent in Elvish. Okay, I will admit that is the level of nerdery that I'm at. I am genuinely interested in the created languages of J.R.R. Tolkien. They're very, very good in their structure. And so I have studied a little bit of that, not to the point where I could like speak it or anything, but just studying it interestingly for the structure. So we have VBLM TUR definitely trolling in your opinion. Yeah, I think they're trolling. Zimriel, Sindarin or Quenya? Well, it depends. Honestly, it depends. So Sindarin is obviously the most developed language. So if you were going to bother to put in the effort to like, say, learn to speak an Elvish language, I think you're better off studying Sindarin just because you're going to be able to use it more and there's a lot more evidence for how it works. Whereas Quenya is the more high, old-fashioned, almost like the liturgical language of the elves. So you get a couple of things written in it, but yeah, if you absolutely have to pick one or the other, I think Sindarin is more functional. So Alwix, is Romulan ale better? Oh no, so in the dinner scene there at the banquet that they're holding, they're drinking Romulan ale. That's the pale blue liquid that they're drinking. And it's technically illegal in the Federation, but because they were so far out in the boonies, they were beyond where the law requires. But maybe part of the reason that Romulan ale was illegal is that it really, really packs a punch. And you later see all of the Starfleet guys with horrible hangovers, and Kirk informs the galley, no more Romulan ale. That's it. We're never drinking that stuff again. So philosophy at work. Wow, so many great details you're pointing out about the dinner table scene. Thank you, that's very kind. The only thing I could remember offhand was at the Lebensraum reference that Kirk makes at the end of it. Yes, I didn't get into that in this because, again, like I said at the beginning, there is so much in this film. I had to streamline it. So at one point during the dinner, General Chang says that we need breathing room. And so Kirk says, Earth, Hitler, 1938, I think, or 33. I forget the year offhand. But so he's really being a jerk right here because he's supposed to be hosting this dinner where he's being nice to these Klingons and he doesn't want to. And then he's actually just undercut Spock a little bit as well because Spock politely identified the source from Hamlet that Gorkon was quoting. And then, Kirk turns right around and compares Chang to Hitler. Like, everyone I don't like is literally Hitler. Like, it's not very nice. Yeah. But it is a reference to that. And I think you can take that either way. It could have been inadvertent on Chang's part, or it could have been deliberate. I think you can really interpret that however you like. Ray and Kat says, who nails on an eye patch? Chang is a bit of a drama queen. Well, of course he's a drama queen. He knows gobs of Shakespeare and can quote it offhand. I think that's just how Klingons roll. They're pretty hardcore, so they're not going to bother with a little strap. Come on, just drill it straight into my skull, right? Bazemore 1 2 3 4. So Bazemore, people think Shakespeare is high culture. It isn't. Well, the cool thing is sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, because Shakespeare was definitely mass entertainment. In between acts, when Shakespeare was performed, you'd get, say, like a clown coming on stage to juggle, or some dancers, or someone would sing a song, or people would bring out a dog and do some tricks. And, you could have absolutely ordinary people paying a penny to get into the Globe Theater, or you could be royalty having Shakespeare and the King's Men performing at court. It can be both. I think Henry V is a really good example of that, because this is this like sweeping epic with these amazing speeches, once more into the breach, and the St. Crispin's Day speech. And then you also have the French lesson between Princess Catherine and her nurse, where they're they're talking about dirty words. And this would have made people laugh their heads off. So that the lesson, that the English lesson that the French princess gets is basically just an excuse to potty mouth and make people giggle. So you get both, and Shakespeare didn't see any reason to differentiate. Star Trek functions in a lot the same way, where you have a lot of these high-minded ideals and then really great fight scenes and space battles. You don't have to have one or the other, and being too rigid about that just makes it not fun. Let's see. Oh, and Bazemore, he proposed to his girlfriend in Elvish. Did she say yes? That would tell you a lot. And Bazemore also says, Godwin's law states that an online discussion grows longer the probability of a comparison involving Nazis or Hitler approaches 100%. That's true. In this case, it was a foregone conclusion, wasn't it? And then Oliver Holmes was saying about his experience with Shakespeare and Star Trek. Seeing the plays, watching The Next Generation with my dad, and this movie just made me grow up loving Shakespeare's style. I didn't notice the details you're teaching, but parental encouragement is key. And encouragement is all you have to do. I really feel like if you're trying to introduce kids to the things that you love, or high culture, the things that have the best ideas, that matter the most, you can't force it. You can't oversell it. It's better to just drop these gems in their way and let them naturally come to appreciate them. The other thing that you need to do too is let kids appreciate things on the level that they're capable of at the time. Like when I first saw this, there was so much that I couldn't understand, but I knew it was interesting and I knew it was cool. And the movie's not going anywhere. I can come back to it whenever I want, and I can watch it again and pick up more and more. And obviously, now that I'm older and more grown up and I know more stuff just because I've had time, I was able to kind of analyze it on more of a level. But yeah. So Ray and Kat says for the Elvish proposal that he got down on one knee, she doesn't need to understand Elvish. That's true. But I mean, if he did a good job, yeah, I'd like to get the whole story of that. That might be fun to hear sometime. I wonder if they had kids, if they tell that story and the kids are just like, oh, you guys are such dorks. But anyway, okay. Well, were there any other questions about this one? I can tell you. I was thinking for next week's live stream, I will wrap up Star Trek 6 and go through all of the literary references in it, kind of more blitz style. I just really felt that it was important to do a nice deep dive into that dinner scene in this film because it's just it's just absolutely top shelf, and it really shows how to do Shakespeare in sci-fi and just really do it right. Yeah. But anyway, well, thanks to all of you for joining. And as always, tell me if there's other topics you want me to cover in the future. I do want to do more Star Trek and Shakespeare episodes. There's a couple of original series episodes that reference Shakespeare that I want to do, but there's also a lot of really good ones in Next Generation, and you get a few mentions elsewhere. I'm sure you guys probably already know this. I have very little interest in anything to do with Star Trek post 2005, but if you absolutely want me to go there, I will. Oh, and Michael says, thank you for the Wuthering Heights review. It was ha ha ha. Well, I was just telling the truth. It's not for me. If someone enjoyed it, good for them. I'm never going to tell somebody else how to have fun, but that was not how I have fun. Anyway, this is fun. Thanks for joining me. And as always, thanks for listening.